Most of us approach persuasion with a specific instinct. We identify a flaw in someone's logic, present the counter-evidence, and wait for them to change their mind. But in practice, this direct challenge usually ends the conversation before it can begin. Brain imaging reveals that hearing "I disagree" bypasses critical thinking and activates the amygdala. The brain perceives disagreement as a physical threat. As heart rate climbs, the nervous system erects a neurological firewall, making the listener incapable of processing opposing information. Moving past this defense requires a tactic called validation. Validation involves using specific phrases like, "It makes sense that you feel that way," or "I'm intrigued by your perspective." These acknowledgments signal safety to the counterpart's nervous system, causing the amygdala to stand down. Persuasion functions as a biological process of disarming threat alarms. Once a counterpart feels heard and completely safe, their brain can finally open enough to consider an alternative point of view. While arguments trigger macro threats, a more subtle micro threat often ruins our daily interactions. Behavioral scientists call it boomerasking. When a friend shares a story about an Italian restaurant they just visited, your brain immediately searches its own archive. You recall your own favorite Italian place, and your instinct is to jump in and share your experience. We assume this creates a connection, but the data suggests otherwise. Our brains are naturally egocentric. By relating the story back to ourselves, we are actually hijacking the narrative and signaling that the other person's experience is less important than our own. Counteracting this trap requires a deliberate pause. Instead of taking the spotlight, you ask a follow-up question. "What did you order?" Or "Who were you with?" Genuine empathy is the result of fighting the brain's default programming to center itself in every conversation. These individual conversational failures scale up into significant societal trends, particularly in how men are socialized to connect. Men are frequently conditioned to view vulnerability as a social threat. This leads to a preference for side-by-side communication, watching games or working on projects together, rather than the face-to-face self-disclosure required for deep friendship. The statistical outcome of this behavior is stark. When facing a personal crisis, men are 400% more likely to report having no support system at all compared to women. This gap grows when conversations stay at the level of external events, like sports or work, and never transition into personal hopes or struggles. The defense mechanisms intended to protect men from vulnerability produce a measurable isolation that leaves them without resources during life's most difficult moments. Today, we often try to bypass conversational friction entirely by using large language models to generate our emails and text messages. In this comparison, the message on the left contains a typo and unique phrasing. The message on the right is pristine and perfectly formatted. While the AI message is more efficient, it lacks the idiosyncrasies that signal a human is actually present. When a person detects an AI-generated pattern in a message, they almost always completely disengage from the relationship. This disengagement happens because the biological signals of effort and attention are missing. We value communication that shows an investment of time. When that effort is outsourced, the receiver's brain devalues the connection. In human relationships, digital efficiency often results in a loss of authenticity, causing the receiver to unconsciously reject the interaction. Mastering conversation isn't just about managing the defense systems of others. It's about learning to override the threat responses within ourselves. Before high-stakes conversations, your body enters a high arousal state. Heart rate spikes and cortisol rises, signaling danger. People try to force calm, but intense arousal causes the nervous system to bounce back to peak stress. Crucially, anxiety and excitement share the exact same physiological signature. Because the physical symptoms are identical, you can reappraise the threat. Stating the words, "I am excited," out loud before a difficult talk forces the brain to view that arousal as an opportunity rather than a danger. Understanding conversation as a biological interface allows us to override our default instincts and finally build the connections we need.